Church member Mark Beymer recently wrote and published this book, Young Jesus, a work of historical fiction inviting us to imagine what life may have been like for Jesus in those years leading up to his public ministry. Mark and I had a chance to chat about the book. Take a listen. Mark, thanks for making time to chat with me like this. I appreciate it.
Good to see you, Pastor.
Good to
Always
see
enjoy talking with you.
the two Marks together again.
Right.
All right.
Concordia and Beamer.
Well, I'm grateful to be able to talk with you always, but especially you just wrote a book. I'm curious, for the sake of our audience, what was your inspiration for writing this book?
Well, I sort of got the inspiration years ago. Back in graduate school, I had a course in Job from a very noted Bible scholar. And he had published, of course, a commentary on the book of Job for Beacon, well known. And in his class, I started thinking about some of the relationships between Persian religion and between which the Jews became exposed to in the diaspora, and of course Judaism, which we were most familiar with. And so that was kind of when I started thinking about it. I started in to write a book then, but I just wasn't prepared mentally to be able to see it all through to a conclusion. And I've started it all over again then recently, and from the same kind of inspiration.
So you started this project a while ago. You recently got it to cross the finish line and you published it. Congratulations on that. And I think there was someone from the church who may have urged you along, right?
There was Larry, and of course my wife encouraged me too, but Larry Oldham, and Larry has written several good books. I've read some of his mystery books, which are quite a bit different genre, but enjoyed them. And he said, look, Mark, it's not that hard. I'll show you how to do it. And so he gave me an assist on working through that.
Fantastic. Well, pretty fun to think here you wrote this book and he's done writing. I know other church members have as well. I think we ought to start a writing club at the church.
I think we should too. I think we'd probably have some additional people that are interested in that would join in with Larry and I.
I think so too. So your book is a work of what we would call historical fiction, right?
Yes,
All
definitely.
right, say more for our audience about what that means.
Well, it's set in a historical time period, and I have to be true to that in my writing, and not sort of bring in different ideas that might not be prevalent during that period of time. For instance, just the idea of time or the idea of mileage as we know it. You just can't speak in those terms. So as we construct a narrative, it's true to the times and it's true to what we know about history. But on the other hand, it's fictional. We don't know of any actual trip that Joshua, of course, might have made into some land other than Palestine. We don't know about any conversation, but it's true to the biblical narrative that we know.
Right, true to the biblical narrative that we know. And I'm reminded that in ancient Judaism, there was something called midrash, which was teaching by the rabbis to fill in the gaps of where people were curious. Obviously, we're curious. What is that life experience for Jesus between being a young boy and his public ministry? We don't know. And I think that your book, like Midrash, is seeking to fill in the gaps. Now, not claiming it to be on par with Holy Scripture, but trying to draw from different resources and concepts to come together.
Right. And of course, I would say that comparison to Midrash is much better than, say, a comparison to some of the pseudepigrapha that came out during the first few centuries where people tried to fill in those blanks about Jesus, claiming all kinds of crazy stories about his magical properties, so to speak. And
Right.
I
Yeah.
think we have a hard time buying into that. And of course, this is not in that kind of a ballpark at all.
Right. Yeah. Some of those stories from the pseudepigrapha are a bit alarming to think about. It's almost like there was a race back in the first century to try to claim ideas about Jesus. And well, anyhow, that's a bit beyond the scope of our conversation. Um, to get back to your book, talk about the Parthian Empire, because I think this is such an important part of history and sociology, and the Parthian Empire relative to the Roman Empire, which, if we read the New Testament, we get a sense of the Roman Empire. And for those of us who have traveled to Italy, we see the ruins of the Roman Empire, but we're not as familiar with the Parthian. Could you say something about that?
Most of us recall that the Great Persian Empire, of course, fought against Greece. And of course, we had Alexander the Great and his followers set up another empire, really extending through Persia and down into Syria. And this was a very important political unit back during the rise of the Roman Empire. It really was about the time of Jesus, just probably 50 years, 50, 60 years before Jesus, that the Romans really emerged to sort of take over this land of Palestine and, of course, combine it with Egypt and some of the other areas. They were really ruling Greece at this time. But one of their chief rivals was Parthia. They never really dominated Parthia for years and years. There was a struggle, and this had many they had many wars between the two empires, and actually Parthia won some of those wars, and this sort of takes us into the middle of that too, where they are still a power and still with their own culture and their own aspirations and competing with Rome. And of course, as with Rome, what goes on in Palestine is kind of an afterthought. It's just this is an area that they aren't really alert to, but out of this area, we know will come a great historical figure, and that's what we're keying on.
Right. So one of the fictional characters in your book is Phrates, who becomes a friend of Joshua. Joshua, who's Jesus, but Phrates and Joshua. Say something about this friendship in the story.
Well, this friendship is very important. Uh, we we sort of have the idea that both Jesus and Phrates are led by spirits. By in the case of Jesus, of course, his heavenly Father, a very spirit of love and justice, and he's coming and becomes a friend of Phrates, and Phrates invites him to visit him in Parthia. And of course, he's great wealth. He's a lord of the land and an experienced warrior. A little bit older than Jesus is about 25 to 30 at this time, and Phrates is probably more like 45 to 50. And in the prime of his life in terms of business. And so this becomes, there's an introduction to the Parthian culture for Jesus as he takes an invitation to visit Phrates in his home city, and it develops a story there, a narrative of what's going on between these two friends. And they become friends, but both of them have secrets. And it's those secrets that, of course, will come into play towards the end of the book.
You get a sense that through this friendship, Joshua, Jesus, has a better sense of his own identity.
Yes, I have a definite belief there that Jesus very strongly felt to be the Son of God. He was taught this from these earliest days. He believed this. And I think in prayer, he met his Father. And this was, of course, a relationship he depended on. And of course, that makes a key to this whole story because that relationship uh, is going to be pivotal in Jesus' life and actions down the road. But at this time, Jesus doesn't know everything about how to be a Messiah. He's learning as an adult. He doesn't have memories of heaven. He's a human being. He's tempted. And of course, Brady's becomes the source of some of that temptation. And how that happens, of course, is part of the tension of the book.
Right. So the title of the book is Young Jesus, and it's certainly an invitation to think creatively about especially the humanity of young Jesus. Some of the scenes I found especially intriguing are like when he's waking up in the morning and he's not sure what time of day it is, and he's getting oriented to just starting the day like a yacht, like so many young men having trouble getting out of bed in the morning. Um, Thinking about also scenes where he's learning about how to care for a horse, how to
Right.
ride a horse. What were some of your inspirations for these kinds of details?
Well, it's just first century life. Of course, Jesus was a product of his class. No one who of Jesus' class at birth had a horse. The horse was something that for upper class people and for military officers. So if you were a foot soldier, even in the Roman Empire, you may not have ever been in contact with a horse. But horses were, of course, very common and used by that class, and Phrades is very custom. So he teaches Joshua
Yeah,
how to uh, do everything: saddle a horse, bridle a horse, ride a horse, and
yeah,
so you learn along with Jesus what goes
mm,
into that a little bit. So
yeah.
hopefully that adds to the plot.
Oh, it definitely does. I think you did a marvelous job writing this book. I want to compliment you on just the composition. I thought so many of your sentences were really well crafted, thoughtful, insightful, and it's a book that flows well from one section to the next. So I want to commend you on that.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, here's to wrap up, I want to ask you kind of a bigger question. What is your ultimate hope in people getting their hands on this book and reading it? What are you hoping for?
Well, I'm hoping that the reader will get a glimpse of Jesus, not as a magical person, but as a very human, down to earth person, very much acquainted with the pressures of life and very much thinking about some of the injustices of this world, but yet really, really bound up with his friend at this time and loves his friend. And in this whole story, there is there is the desire for Jesus to be faithful to his calling, what his father wants him to do, but at the same time, he wants to find his way in this world, and he has to rely on that relationship to get there. And I think there's some a lesson in that for us too. And that's something that I hope the reader will take away with, as well as his loyalty to his friend.
Awesome. Well, people can pick up this book at Amazon.com.
They can.
All right, very good.
They can either search under my name, Mark Beymer, Beymer, or Young Jesus, and it should take you right to the book.
It does, takes you right to the book, and we'll include a link in the notes on this YouTube video where
Good.
people can click. Anything else that would be helpful for us to know about this book?
No, just it was fun writing it. I wrote it for people to enjoy it. I hope the readers will.
Well, count me as one. I have certainly enjoyed reading it, and I look forward to others appreciating it. Thank you, Mark, and thank you for this time to chat.